Montana Territory, August 1878. The day heat clung to the earth like a fever, and the wind carried the scent of gunpowder before a single shot rang out. Georgia Ellison had just stepped out of the general store in Dry Creek when the bandits rode in. Dust boiled up behind their horses, and their eyes were hard behind scarves and pistols. She froze on the wooden walkway, a sack of flour in one hand, her widow's black dress clinging to her legs in the breeze. Her husband had been gone 8 months now, buried in the hills beyond the churchyard, and she had learned to keep her head down and her voice quieter than her grief. But that morning, she had allowed herself to feel a sliver of peace. That was before the first gunshot cracked through the silence. The bandits fired into the sky, shouting orders, herding townsfolk like cattle. Georgia's heart slammed in her chest. She dropped the sack and backed toward the alley beside the store, but her foot caught on the hem of her skirt. She stumbled and hit the ground hard, scraping her palms on the splintered boards as a man on horseback turned toward her, raising his revolver. Before she could scream, a body hit the ground beside her. A man, tall, lean, with sandy-colored hair and a dust-covered shirt, shoved her behind a barrel and threw himself in front of her. Bullets tore through the air, snapping wood and shattering glass. He stood firm, firing back, shielding her with his body like she was something precious. When the noise finally broke, when the bandits galloped off with stolen goods and wounded pride, leaving smoke and silence behind, Georgia sat up, trembling, to find the man still crouched in front of her. "You hurt?" he asked, voice low and steady. She stared at him. "No, Why did you do that?" He looked down at his side where a bullet had grazed him. Blood stained his shirt, but he didn't seem to notice. "Because you were about to die." That was the day Georgia Ellison met Prescott Taylor. He helped her to her feet like it was nothing. She pulled her hand from his grip and stared up at him, torn between gratitude and disbelief. His eyes were pale green, calm like the sky before a storm. He tipped his hat, winced slightly from his wound, and said, "You should get inside. Might be more trouble coming." Instead of leaving, he walked her to the sheriff's office. Hands trembling, she wrapped her shawl tighter. "You are not from around here?" "No, ma'am." "Then why risk your life for someone you do not know?" He stopped in front of the office, glanced at her. "Because I do not like watching good people die." The sheriff was already shouting orders, gathering a posse, but Georgia could not take her eyes off Prescott. When he turned to go, she grabbed his arm. "You're bleeding. It'll keep. You need a doctor." He shrugged, but she saw the way he gritted his teeth. "I have had worse." "Come with me," she said before she could talk herself out of it. "I live just outside town. It's clean and quiet." "You can rest there." He hesitated, but then nodded once. "All right." She hitched her mare, Sadie, and he led his chestnut gelding beside her. They rode out past the edge of town, where the land opened wide and the sky looked too big for one person to carry alone. Her cabin stood at the edge of the cottonwoods, modest but well kept, with a garden out back and a rocking chair that had not moved since her husband died. Inside, she cleaned his wound with a steady hand, listening as he told her he'd been a cattle driver, a tracker, and a hired gun, though he left that last part quiet, like it tasted wrong in his mouth now. His voice was rough, but not unkind. When he winced, she pressed a cool cloth against his skin and said, "You are lucky it was only a graze." He looked at her then, really looked, and something shifted behind those pale green eyes. "Lucky's not a word I hear often." After she bandaged him, he sat on the porch while she made coffee. The silence stretched between them, easy somehow. She brought out 2 tin cups and sat beside him. "My husband's name was Abel," she said after a long while. "He died last winter, fever, it took him fast." Prescott nodded, slow. "I lost someone too." "Long time ago." They did not speak about it more. Some things were not for sharing, but when their hands brushed on the porch rail, neither of them pulled away. That night she offered him the spare bed. He refused, said the floor would do just fine. But when she woke before dawn, she found him outside, standing guard with his rifle in hand, eyes sweeping the horizon like he expected the bandits to return. "Why are you out here?" she asked quietly. He turned, surprised. "Because they saw your face." "Might come back looking for you, and you would protect me again." He gave a small nod. "Without question." She stepped closer, the morning light softening his jawline. "You do not even know me." "I know enough." He lowered his rifle and looked at her like she was the only steady thing in a world gone mad. And for the first time in months, she felt something stir in her chest, something warm and terrifying, safety, hope, maybe even the beginning of love. But neither of them said it, not yet. They just stood there, the wind brushing past and the sun rising slow behind them. Prescott didn't leave the next morning. Georgia didn't ask him to stay, but she didn't ask him to go either. She made cornbread and beans, set 2 plates at the table, and when he sat across from her without a word, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. By the 3rd day, he'd repaired the barn door that had been hanging crooked since spring. Said nothing about it, just saw the need and fixed it. Georgia watched from the kitchen window, fingers still damp from rinsing dishes. His shirt clung to his back in the afternoon heat, and when he stood to stretch, he paused as if sensing her gaze. Later, as they sat beneath the cottonwood trees behind the cabin, the sun low and gold across the field, Prescott rubbed a thumb across a smooth stone he'd picked up from the creek. Georgia stitched a hem that had torn on her work dress, her needle moving steady through fabric worn soft with use. "You ever think about leaving this place?" he asked, eyes still on the stone. She tied off the thread and looked up. "What would I be if I did? I've been Georgia Ellison of Dry Creek since I was 16. I wouldn't know how to be someone else." "Maybe you wouldn't have to be someone else. Just somewhere else." She folded the dress onto her lap. "You sound like a man who's left more than one thing behind." He turned the stone in his hand. "I used to ride with a crew out of Cheyenne, drove cattle as far south as Abilene. One night we lost a man in the river, young, barely shaving. I was the one closest when he slipped, couldn't reach him in time." Georgia didn't speak. The wind rustled through the cottonwoods like a whisper between them. He went on. "After that, I started riding slower, took jobs that kept me on dry land. Folks thought I'd gone soft." "Maybe I had. You didn't go soft," she said. "You started wanting something else." He looked at her then, the weight of that truth settling quiet between them. "What do you want, Georgia?" She threaded her needle back into the cloth. "I want to not be afraid when I go into town. I want to wake up and not count the things I've lost before I get out of bed." He didn't answer, but he didn't need to. That evening, she brought out a jar of preserved peaches. It had been meant for winter, but something about the way he looked at her like she was still made of light, not just loss, made her want to share it now. He took the spoon she offered and ate slowly, as if tasting something sweet for the first time in a long while. "You ever been married?" she asked, voice low. He shook his head. "Came close once. She ran off with a trader out of Fort Kearney, left a note, said she wanted more than dust and cattle." Did it hurt? He met her eyes. "Some things leave a mark. But not every mark's a wound." The fire crackled in the hearth behind them. Georgia leaned back in her chair, her bare feet tucked beneath her. Prescott's chair scraped softly as he stood and walked to the door. He paused, hand on the frame. "You sleep with the windows open?" "Only when I'm not alone on the land." He nodded once. "I'll keep watch again." She rose and crossed the room to stand beside him. Outside, the moon lit the field in silver. He didn't turn when she stepped closer. "You don't have to keep proving you're safe," she said. "I know." She waited, then touched his arm. "You can come inside tonight. The floor's still yours, but you don't need to stand guard." He turned then, and she saw something shift behind his eyes, not surprise, but something softer. He stepped inside and set his rifle beside the door. That night, she left the bedroom door open. Not an invitation, just a sign that she trusted him to be near. And in the quiet hours before dawn, she woke to the sound of rain on the roof and the knowledge that she no longer felt alone. The morning after the rain, Prescott brought in a stack of wood without being asked. His boots left prints across the drying floorboards, but Georgia didn't mind. She stood at the stove, apron tied at her waist, shifting oatcakes in the pan with the edge of a spoon worn thin from years of use. He set the wood down beside the hearth, then leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "You always cook like that," she glanced at him. "Like what?" "Like the world might end if something burns." "I don't waste what I can help," she said. "Not after last winter." He didn't ask what had happened. She didn't offer. Some things had weight that only made sense in silence. They ate without much talk, save for the scrape of forks and the whir of wind against the shutters. When the plates were cleared, Georgia took a scarf from a peg by the door and tied it around her head. "I need to check the chickens," she said. "One's been laying soft shells, means something's off." "I'll come." She hesitated, then nodded. Outside, the ground was damp and the sky low with clouds that hadn't quite decided if they were finished. The coop stood a little ways past the garden plot, beside the fence Abel had built their first year on the land. It leaned now, just a touch, like it missed his touch. Prescott knelt to unlatch the coop door while she gathered feed from the sack. The hens clucked and scattered around her feet, and one pecked her boot with sharp annoyance. "I never liked birds much," he said, watching them flap and bicker. "They've got too many opinions," she laughed, a quick sound that surprised even her. "Then you've never met a milk cow with a grudge?" He glanced up. "You laughing at me?" "No, just remembering what it feels like." He stood slowly, brushing straw from his pants. "You ought to do it more." She didn't answer. Instead, she moved toward the fence and rested her palm against the top rail. A hawk circled high in the gray light, wings wide and steady. "I've been thinking of selling the place," she said. Prescott stepped beside her. "Why? Too much land for one woman, too many memories for one heart. You don't need to give it up." "I might not have a choice. The taxes come due next month." He looked at her, quiet for a long moment. "I've got coin saved. From a job I turned down in Elko. Wasn't sure why I kept it." "Maybe now I know." She turned, startled. "I'm not taking your money. I'm not offering it like a loan. I'm offering it like a man who wants to see you stay where you belong." She stepped back. "Prescott, I can't be some burden you carry out of guilt." "I never said you were." They stood in the damp grass, the space between them humming with something unspoken. "I'm not ready," she whispered. "To be someone's anything. I'm not asking you to be." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded square of paper. "This is the claim to a parcel west of Helena. Timber and water rights both. I bought it 2 years ago, thinking I might settle there someday. Haven't set foot on it since. Why are you telling me this? Because I'm tired of drifting. And I'm tired of watching good things slip away because I'm too careful to reach for them." Her breath caught. "I don't know what to say." "Then don't say anything yet." He tucked the paper back into his coat. "Just think about it. You wouldn't have to leave this place unless you wanted to. But if you ever did, I'd want it to be with me." The wind picked up and the hawk disappeared into the clouds. Inside the cabin, she sat by the stove with her mending while he took the horses to the creek. She didn't look at the door when it closed behind him. Her fingers moved over the torn hem of her apron, but she didn't stitch a thing. She just sat and listened to the quiet, which now held the shape of a man's voice and the unfamiliar weight of choice. By dusk, he still hadn't returned. She found herself staring down the path, heart tight with something like worry. When he did come back, leading both horses with a bundle of wild mint tied to his saddle, she stepped out onto the porch. "I made stew," she said. He looked up, eyes tired but warm. "Smells like a home." She nodded once. "You should wash up." He tied off the reins and stepped toward the basin. She brought him a dry cloth without speaking, then waited as he rubbed the trail from his hands. "I thought about what you said," she said finally. He paused, water dripping from his fingers. "I don't want to leave here, not yet. But I don't want to do it alone anymore either." He turned toward her, and the look that passed between them was not sudden, not sharp but deep and slow, like a river that had always been flowing beneath the surface. He didn't touch her. He didn't need to. She said, "I'm still finding my way." "I'll walk beside you," he said. "No rush, no pushing." They stood there as the lantern flickered behind the glass, the stew cooling on the table and the night settling close around them, and in the stillness she reached out, rested her fingers in his. Not tightly, not yet, but enough. 2 weeks passed beneath the waning summer sun, each day folding gently into the next. The land turned gold at the edges. Grasshoppers clung to fence posts. The air carried the first hint of coming frost before daybreak. Georgia rose before the rooster most mornings, her sleeves rolled to the elbow, soil under her nails before breakfast. Prescott worked alongside her, mostly silent but always steady mending the south fence where elk had tested it, digging a drainage trench behind the barn before the autumn rains set in. They didn't speak of the future again, not directly. But Georgia noticed the way he began stacking kindling in the shed, as if he meant to be there when snow came. She saw how he moved through the house now without asking where things belonged. His rifle leaned against the wall beside the door, not ready for travel, just ready. One afternoon, she found him near the creek, sleeves pushed up, bent over a line of fresh-cut willow branches. He was stripping bark with the edge of a knife, slow and careful. "What are you making?" she asked, stepping closer. "A cradle frame." She blinked. "For what?" He looked up, a crease between his brows. "You said one of the hens crushed her last clutch. Figured if you had a better brooding box, you might save the next one." She folded her arms. "You ever build one before?" "No. But I've watched it done." He didn't elaborate, and she didn't press. Instead, she sat on a flat stone nearby and watched him work. His hands were sure, and though he didn't hum or whistle like Abel used to, there was a quiet rhythm to what he did, like he found peace in the doing. "I used to think I'd have 5 children by now," she said, eyes on the rushing water. "Abel wanted a big family. We tried, but it never happened." Prescott didn't answer right away. He set down the branch he'd been working and scrubbed his palms against his trousers. "My brother had 6, he said finally. "All girls. He died in a mining collapse outside of Butte. His wife moved back east with the littlest one. I haven't seen them since." She nodded slowly. "It's hard staying in touch once the land swallows people up." He met her gaze across the stones and water. "You ever wish you'd left?" "No," she said. "I just wish I'd known how to be alone without being hollow inside." The shadows stretched longer as they walked back to the house, close but not touching. That night, she lit 2 lamps instead of 1 and opened both windows to let in the slow, cooling air. He didn't ask why. The next morning, the sheriff rode out with dust on his coat and a letter in his satchel. Georgia met him at the gate while Prescott watched from the porch. "They caught 2 of the men from the Dry Creek raid," the sheriff said. "The others scattered. One of them talked." Georgia's throat went dry. "Said what?" "That they'd been told about a widow outside of town. Said she looked like easy pickings. Said she saw too much." Prescott stepped down from the porch, his face hard. "They coming back, doubt it. But I wanted you to know." After the sheriff left, Georgia stood at the gate a long time. Prescott came to stand beside her. "You didn't tell me they were looking for you," he said. "I didn't know." He looked out toward the hills. "You still want to stay here?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she turned toward the barn, where the hens were scratching in the dirt and the wind stirred the low branches of the cottonwoods. "I don't want to be chased off my land," she said, "but I don't want to live waiting for a knock at the door either." "We could leave," he said. "Start over. I've still got that land west of Helena." She turned to him, eyes steady. "Would you really give up this for that?" "I'd give up the road, not this." She stepped closer, close enough to see the scar just beneath his jaw, the one that caught the light when he turned his head. "I don't need a savior, Prescott," she said. "I need someone who'll be here in the morning." "I'll be here," he said, voice low, "if you'll have me." Her hand found his, fingers rough from work, and for the first time she didn't pull away. "I'm not afraid anymore," she said. He leaned his forehead to hers, and they stood like that, breath shared, the world quiet around them. Inside, the stew cooled on the stove, and the cradle frame rested near the hearth, unfinished but waiting, just like everything else. The first frost came in a hush, laying its silver hand across the pasture and curling the last of the squash vines overnight. Georgia stepped outside with a bucket of warm mash for the hens and found the ground stiff beneath her boots. Prescott was already up, splitting cedar by the shed, shirt sleeves rolled and breath rising in clouds. She paused to watch him, the axe thudding in rhythm, wood splitting clean. "I'll need to bring the last of the potatoes in," she said when he paused to wipe his brow. "I'll help after breakfast," he said, stacking the halves beside the chopping block. They worked in silence, not out of habit but comfort. The cellar was half-stocked already, shelves lined with jars and sacks of grain from the last trip to town. Georgia had bartered some late summer herbs for honey and a bolt of cloth. She hadn't yet decided what to sew with it, but she'd taken it anyway, feeling something stir at the idea of making something new. That evening, Prescott brought in a pail of water and set it beside the stove. Georgia was wiping flour from the table, a loaf cooling on the rack. He leaned against the doorframe, quiet. "I want to ask you something," he said. She looked over her shoulder. "All right. I've worked land before, lived on it too. But I've never done it with someone I wanted to grow old beside." Her hands stilled on the towel. "I don't have much to offer," he continued, "but what I do have I'll give if you want it." She turned fully now, the lamplight soft on her face. "You're not asking me to leave anymore?" "No. I'm asking if I can stay." She stepped toward him, the room warm with the scent of bread and cedar smoke. "I've never said yes to anything without thinking on it first, I know. But I've thought on this," she said, voice steady. "And yes, Prescott. If you're staying, then stay as mine." He reached for her hand, calloused and familiar, and she let her fingers settle into his like they'd always belonged there. They were married the following Sunday, under the cottonwoods, with the preacher from Dry Creek reading from a worn Bible and a handful of neighbors standing quiet in the grass. Georgia wore her mother's brooch at her collar. Prescott wore his father's watch, newly repaired. They spoke their vows with clear voices, not for show, but for truth. Afterward, they served stew and coffee in tin cups and shared slices of the wedding pie Georgia had baked that morning, crust flaked just right. Children ran through the orchard rows, and someone brought out a fiddle. The wind lifted the edge of Georgia's skirt as she leaned her head briefly against Prescott's shoulder, eyes closed. That night, with the guests gone and the lanterns dimmed, Prescott took down the cradle frame he'd finished the week before and set it near the hearth. He didn't say anything, just ran a hand along the smoothed edge, then crossed the room to her. Georgia had changed into her nightdress, hair unpinned, firelight catching the curve of her cheek. She looked up at him, her expression soft and sure. "I never thought I'd feel safe again," she said. "You are," he said, "and not just because of me." She touched his chest, just above the scar where the bullet had grazed him months before. "You're good with your hands," she murmured. He pulled her gently into his arms. "I'm better with a lifetime." They lay down together with the window open to the breeze and the quiet sounds of the land that was now theirs, shared, tended, defended. Spring came early the next year. The hens laid steadily and the apple trees blossomed strong. Georgia planted herbs near the porch and Prescott built a bench beneath the cottonwoods. They rode into town less often, not out of caution anymore, but contentment. The land fed them. The fire kept them warm. The days passed with work and touch and laughter that came easier now. When the child came a boy with her mouth and his eyes, they named him Abel, and Prescott carved the name into the cradle with quiet reverence. Georgia rocked the baby beneath the open window, sunlight pooling on the floor, and Prescott sat beside her, one hand wrapped around hers. "Do you ever miss the road?" she asked. He shook his head, gaze on the child. "No, I was never looking for a road, I was looking for home." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "You found it, and he had." They lived the rest of their days on that land, through snow and storm and long summers. They built a life from quiet moments and hard-won trust, raising children who remembered how strong softness could be. And when they grew old, they sat together on the porch each evening, her hand in his still. Love didn't come with thunder, it came like morning light over frost-covered fields. Slow, certain, and lasting forever.